So you're very welcome this afternoon to the interview skills workshop, and we're going to cover a number of, I suppose, different aspects around interview skills and interview skills training. We will look at types of video interviews, so live and recorded. We'll have a chat about how to prepare, how best to plan and prepare for interviews, and then particularly hints and tips around answering questions and a very good technique that you can use to answer competency-based questions in interview, which tend to be predominantly the main types of question format that you'll find in an interview. But before I kick off, just to ask, if you could pop in the chat box, have you had uh, a video interview, yes or no? Those of you that are with us this afternoon. So yes or no, have you had a video interview to date? Yes, thanks, Martin. Okay, very good. Yes, Josephina, you had as well. Okay, great stuff. So 100% of you have had a video interview. So hopefully, I suppose some of the tips that we're going to cover today will add value to you. And we'll have time at the end for questions and answers, particularly like kind of maybe even getting some feedback from you on how those interviews went. But we won't have to include that as part of the recording. So I'll just record the presentation and we can have a chat then toward the end of the session. So, in relation to types of interviews, I suppose it's important to know that there are live video interviews, which you'd consider the same as like kind of a live face-to-face interviews. But I suppose since COVID, many interviews tend to be online and through the use of technology rather than face to face in the same room. But then you also have recorded video interviews, so these are slightly different. So it's still video based, but it's you can often hear it being called one way interviews, in that you're being asked a series of questions and you're recording your answers and submitting those to the organization or the company. Whereas a live video interview is very much live at the time and the date, and you're speaking, with others, like kind of, albeit through a technological platform and online. The majority of the live interviews then use different kind of types of software. So you might find that it's, Skype used to be very common in the past. Now it tends to be more Zoom, Teams, like we're using at the moment, or there may be other video conferencing software that companies specifically use for their interview processes. They are very similar, as I said, to face. They are live. You'll find, that you'll have a person or people who will be in another room, and you will be like kind of conducting a live conversation with them. So I suppose in the same context that if you were going for a live face-to-face interview, you want to ensure that you're in a quiet, private, well lit room, and that is free from distractions in the same way that you would be if you were going into a face-to-face interview. Very important to ensure your internet connection is stable, that doesn't drop during the interview, and check your audio and your camera in advance of attending the interview, or if you're getting specific conference software to test that platform in advance of going for interview. So these are things, I suppose, that in a similar way, if you were going to a face-to-face interview, I might be saying to you, make sure that you know where the venue is, make sure that you've planned your route, and that if you're taking public transport, that you've looked up your timetable. So it's a similar kind of planning the logistics of getting to the interview and ensuring that everything works. Because, for example, even if you think about it and you're all in UL, like if you got called for an interview in UL, you could be anywhere from the UL Arena down to the Chemie Business School, across to the the Irish World Academy, or the any of the buildings, like kind of over there, Campus Life Services, for example. And so if you if you were coming on campus, it could take you anything between like kind of 10 and 20 minutes to get from one of those places to another. So that's in the same way, like kind of you think about those logistics, you also want to do the same in terms of your preparation for your live video interview. For your live video interviews, then again, you nearly treat them like kind of as if you were going to a face-to-face interview. Dress as if you were attending a face-to-face interview. I know, there's a lot of talk and a lot of kind of jokes about having your pajama bottoms on when you're on camera, because obviously, you can only be seen from the waist up if you're going for a live interview. um, but again, it's a good idea even for yourself in terms of like kind of motivation, and for the psychology of preparing yourself for interview, to dress as if you're attending a normal interview. Check the position of your camera. You want your head and shoulders to be visible in the camera. You should be looking at the camera when you are speaking to your live audience, rather than down at the screen, because by looking at the camera, that's what's going to make eye contact with whoever is interviewing you. You want to be careful of lighting. Then you want, rather than too much light coming from behind you, you want the light kind of to be shining on you, so coming from behind your laptop or your screen towards your face. Um, and and that allows like kind of for you to be seen in your best light, in the best light, and most visible. And in as much as possible, then, because I suppose interviews are a constructed format of a conversation, but you want to try and come across as natural as you can. Engage in what we call nonverbal communication. Nod, smile, show that you're listening. You may even be using hand gestures that are visible to those that are like kind of on the other side of the camera. And so that's that's a very good way to kind of conduct yourself in as much as possible when you're doing the live video interviews. Think of it as if you were having like kind of a face-to-face live interview. When we're thinking then in terms of the recorded interview and how that works, so generally speaking, if you are being invited to conduct a recorded or a one-way or an on-demand interview, a recruiter or a company, the employer, will send you an invitation via email, and that email will contain a link to your interview. Oftentimes, we'll hear from employers that they will tend to send that out on maybe a Thursday, so that in giving you 72 hours, you have a work day Friday to complete it, or you have the freedom of maybe a little bit more time over the weekend. So, normally, it's around 72 hours to complete your recorded interview if they're sending you out a link. You'll find for the main part that you'll get up to 6 questions, um, and they will offer you the opportunity to have reading time and then answering time. So you'll see that your question will be delivered either in writing, so you'll have like kind of a text-based question on the screen, or sometimes you'll actually have the recording of someone asking you the question on screen, and they will give you up to a minute to read that question and think about your answer to the question. And then that's not recorded, that period of preparation, but then the 2 minutes that you get for answering is recorded. For the main part, you do not have the opportunity to retake or start over. So once you hit record, or once you hit go in terms of answering the questions, and you come to that point where you've had your reading time and now it's your answering time, that 2 minutes will be recorded, and that's the information that will be presented then to the employer once you've submitted the interview. So just be careful, I suppose, in terms of planning, because of that you don't have that opportunity to retake. But most sites will give you the opportunity to do some practice questions, and these are not seen by the employer. And definitely we would advise you to just complete those, use and make use out of those planning questions or those practice questions that are available for you to complete in advance of the live format. So this is pretty much what you'll see in the recorded interview. You'll see the question there: why would you be suitable for the role? As I said, sometimes in that box where it says why would you be suitable for the role, you may also have a video of someone from the company asking you that question. And then you'll have some time to prepare your answer. So that can be up to anything from 20 seconds up to a minute to think about your answer. And then the actual recording of the 2 minutes where you can give your answer. You'll see there that says 1:34. So time to answer this question. It's probably counting down. Um, so you might have like kind of the conference or the interviewing platform that you're using or the software might count up to 2 minutes, or it might count down from 2 minutes to zero. So you don't know that until you kind of get the link and do your practice questions. And if you finish a little ahead of the 2 minutes, you can click the stop recording button and next question. Or if not, it will automatically stop recording and move to the next question. So again, it's a good idea in advance to prepare and record yourself answering questions and see, can you get those questions answered within a 2 minute time frame. And that way you will, because you don't want to finish too early within your 2 minutes either. So you're trying to find that balance. So that's why practice is a very good idea. So the advice then, look at the camera, not at your photo, because that way you're making eye contact with whoever is going to be reviewing you. Dress professionally, complete the practice questions. And again, these won't be seen by the employer. Make sure you test your camera, lighting, and sound before you conduct the interview. Finish within time, so that requires you to practice in advance. And then we'll talk about this in a few minutes, to use the star structure in terms of answering your questions, and I'll give you some information on that in a few moments. And then last but not least, smile. So again, you're trying to get across, the nonverbal communication. When you're engaged, even though it's a recording, that will also help you in terms of, like, kind of, coming across naturally as well. Here's just a graphic in terms of video setup, what an optimal setup looks like. So you'll see it. It's that one there in the green, where the um, the webcam on the screen is up, like kind of at eye level. It's elevated so that the candidate isn't looking down at the webcam. The light is behind the laptop or the screen, and it's shining toward the face of the candidate. So you just want to be careful. I mean, you don't want that shining too bright, but you want the light to be coming from that direction. Um, and again, you're making eye contact with the camera and not with your photo or video on the page. We have an excellent practice platform that you can use with a lot of different types of interviews, including, engineering, graduate, IT, administration, customer service, management. So you'll see them all on this platform that we have called Shortlist Me. So it's a software that we have licensed to use, and you can go in and you can practice interview questions. Now, the thing about the Shortlist Me is it's a video, so it's an on-demand one way, but you have the opportunity to retake. But what's brilliant about it is that it will give you feedback. So as well as you reviewing yourself and looking at, like, kind of how you perform on video, and being able to kind of go back and look at, like, kind of how you answer the questions, um, and how you can manage the time that you get in terms of preparation and answering questions, you can also get feedback from the platform in terms of your speed, in terms of your use of filler words. So it gives you a good indication of how you perform in a recorded interview. And again, you have the opportunity to practice, like, kind of lots of different types of interviews and lots of different types of questions. So I definitely urge you to do that. And the link is up there on the top of the slide, the Shortlist Me platform. But if we, I suppose, go back nearly to the very beginning, or even before the interview, before you even get to the interview, and I've talked a little about, like, kind of logistics for a live interview, the way you plan, how you're getting to the interview, or for an online interview, planning your internet access and your webcam setup and stuff like that. I suppose in addition, then there's lots of other preparation that you need to engage in before you conduct an interview. So one is understanding the job and the job role. So a good idea, particularly if you get a job specification, is to go through that and get a highlighter or get a pen and underline all of the essential and desirable skills or competencies, and make a list of those. Just get a blank page, make a list of those. I would say divide the page into two columns, put a line down the middle of the page, write out the list of essential and desirable skills and competencies that the employer says they're looking for in the job, and then try and think of times when you demonstrated those skills and competencies. So if they say they're looking for excellent communication and teamwork and IT skills and evidence of your initiative, write those down on the left hand side, and then start to brainstorm times that you showed good communication, or you showed good teamwork skills, or you demonstrated that you used your own initiative to do something. Or, for example, your IT skills, what are the IT packages that you use? So that you've prepared that list. And that's like kind of making a very close match then between what the employer is looking for and what you have to offer for the role. So that's you. So that's looking and understanding at the job and how you meet the requirements of the job. You also need to do your homework on the company. So, how long has the department or the company itself been established? What size is the department that you'd be working for, the company? What kind of services do they provide? Who are their stakeholders, both internal and external within the company? Who are the decision makers? Are there any major achievements that that you can look up that would be recent, or anything that's newsworthy in relation to the company, and look at like kind of sector trends. So what's best practice within the sector. A good idea, as well as, I mean, you'll always find this on the company website, and there's the about section, about us on a company website that you can look up, and you'll find lots of that information. But as well as that, it's a good idea to follow the company on LinkedIn, because you'll get like kind of up to date information on that, and equally to follow them on social platforms. Follow them on Twitter, where you'll find like kind of, particularly say, for example, if they had recent achievements, oftentimes they'll be posted on the likes of Twitter, or maybe Instagram, or even TikTok now is starting to. So follow the company on those social platforms, as well as looking up the company website. The other thing you need to do then is prepare a list of potential questions. Now, you can just even put into Google competency questions, and you'll get tons and tons of sample questions. But what I'd recommend is that you go back to the job description and go look at the different skills and competencies they say they want for the job or for the company, and then start to kind of think about questions relating to that. So if they say they want someone with good communication skills, is that written communication or oral communication? And then if you were to think of a question, it might be, can you give an example of, how you demonstrate excellent communication skills? Or can you think about a time that you had to communicate something difficult? Or can you think about a time that you had to develop like kind of um, write a report? So that you're thinking in terms of the role, and that the questions would be the fit for the role. um, we talked a little bit about the logistics and the outfit, but again, aside from the visual and like kind of preparing yourself and fitting in with the requirement of the company, it's also it's also a very good idea in terms of like kind of psychologically for you to dress like kind of for the interview, to get you into that mindset of the interview. And then last but not least, practice. So practice yourself, practice like recording yourself, practice using shortlist me, practice by making an appointment with myself or one of the careers advisors, um, and or like kind of practice with friends and family. It's a very good idea, because it gets you to think in terms of like kind of how you'd answer the questions, but it also gets you to think in terms of the time frame and the time it takes you to answer the questions that you're being asked. And so, what are the kinds of questions that you'll tend to be asked? So, you'll find, a number of different kind of categories, I suppose, of question, but oftentimes the competency based questions are the most common. But you'll always get some general opening questions. So, tell us a little bit about yourself. Why did you decide to study what you're studying? Why do you want to work with us, or why did you apply to us? And what kind of research have you done on us or on the role? So that's that preparation, like kind of particularly around the company, and also that bit about yourself, like that, tell me about yourself. A good format to think of when you're addressing that is to give an overview of your education, your experience, and your skills and competencies, and how they relate to the role. So, again, you're trying to match yourself to the job description that you've received, or the research that you've done on the job if you don't have a detailed job description. Then competency questions tend to start with, can you tell me about a time when you had to? Or can you give me an example of a time when you had to? Or can you describe a situation when you had to? So it's always looking for examples from your past experience. And so, can you tell me about a time when you had to cope with a difficult situation? Could be a question. Or can you tell me about a time when you had to meet a strict deadline? Or can you tell me about a time that you had to work in a team? So it's all the time looking at past scenarios or past examples. And so I'm going to give you a technique in the next slide about how you might deal with those questions. But essentially, it's important to remember that, I suppose, from the company's perspective, what they're trying to do is by asking you about a time when you did something, it'll give them a good sense of whether you'd be able to do that in the future, even if it's not the exact same scenario. So, there, for example, when they say, can you tell me about a time when you worked in a team? Your example of working in a team may be from your part-time work in a bar or in a restaurant, and it may not seem that it relates to a graduate role, but actually it's still got all of the qualities of working with people, of interpersonal, of communication. And so showing that you did that in the past is a good indicator that you'll be able to do it in the future, and gives that indication to the company. And then finally, strengths based questions. So a lot more companies are starting to use strengths based questions in their interview. And so an example of those kind of questions would be, what's your greatest achievement, or how do you think your strengths will play to this role? So this, I think, requires a little bit of thought in advance of going to interview, because it might be very hard, off the cuff. If I were to ask you now, can you name what your top three strengths are? So you need to spend a little bit of time reflecting on this. But the reason employers are asking you strengths based questions is because what they want is to get someone in a to move into a role that they enjoy and that energizes them. Because if you enjoy and are energized by the job, then you'll stay there longer. And it's particularly the case that, like, kind of say, many graduates coming out of university will have very similar experience, very similar modules, very similar skills, very similar attributes that you're bringing. And so it's less about your ability, because like most graduate jobs will offer a huge amount of training as you move into the role, and it's more about your level of interest and energy in the sector and in the role. um, so you could have a look again, and research, like, kind of what are strengths based questions. But what does a good day look like to you, or how would your friends describe you? um, what you enjoy doing. I mean, they're examples of strengths based question, because it's something that you're good at, but it's also something that energizes you. And that's the bit that's, like, kind of, I suppose, worth taking on board. What do you enjoy, and what gives you energy? And oftentimes you'll find that those are things that are, like, kind of your strengths. And in as much as possible, an employer wants to find someone who is energized by the work that they are doing or will be doing. So I talked about the competency questions and the technique that you could use to answer those. So the STAR technique, STA, or with the potential second or method, is a very good structure that you could use to practice answering these questions. Um, so for example, there you'll see S and T, the situation or task. So when you get asked one of those questions, can you tell me about a time when you had to meet a strict deadline? Then you go back and you say, what was the event? So describe, to try and bring that event to life. Um, and for example, that might be around a project that you had due in. It could be your FYP, indeed, your final year project, or it could be an assignment that you had. And you want to talk in terms of that specific assignment, that specific time when you had to meet a deadline. For example, it could be when you were working on your co-op placement, what type of deadline you had. And then the A is the action, so what you did. And that really is the bulk of the story, or the body of the story. So you're going to go through the details of exactly what you did and how you behaved during that situation. Now, the most common mistake that people make here is that they say, we did this and we did that, particularly if they're asked a question about working in a team. But what you want to try and do is stick with the word I, because you're the one that's being interviewed for the role, and it's about what you did within, like, kind of the context of that story or that situation that's important. And then the or can be, as I said, a double or, so the result. So what happened as a result of all of the actions that you took? And this is where you talk about the outcome, or of the situation. Now, not it's not always the case that the outcome is positive. So this is where reflection comes in. So it might be highlighting what you've learned from the situation. And as I said, if it were negative, then how you've made steps to prevent a reoccurrence, or what you've learned and what you would do differently the next time. So I think that's a very good technique that you can practice, once you take your list of competencies and ask yourself, like, kind of to come up with scenarios or stories. Another good way to think about, like, kind of competency questions is to think about stories that you can tell about times that you showed um, your skills to good effect. So that's a brief kind of whistle stop tour through interviews for you. But just by way of recapping, advanced preparation is key. So both in terms of, the logistics and the planning your outfit and the setting up your computer or your laptop, or ensuring you know where you're going if it's live face to face, as well as preparation around the role and the company itself. Try and put yourself in the shoes of the recruiter if you can. So what do they want to know about you? What do they want to know in the context of the job that they're advertising? And doing your company and your job research is key. So use your job description for detailed job research. Use the company website, but don't forget sites and social options such as, like, kind of um, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, to find out information and up to date information about the company. Find out, are the videos live or recorded. Use Shortlist Me to record yourself and practice interviews, or use Careers Connect to make an appointment with myself or one of the careers team for um, a live practice interview. And make sure that you kind of, like, practice those competency based questions. Take that star model, and maybe even, like, kind of practice a couple of competencies every couple of weeks or every week to build up a bank of examples of competency answers, or answers to competency based questions. So thanks a million to you all for your time. If you have any questions now, what I'll do is I will stop the recording, and happy to open it up for any questions that anyone might have. So thanks a million.